talk more about a different investigation tangentially involving the former president, and that is January 6th, with several big updates on legal proceedings involving people who attacked the Capitol that day. And let me start with what is just coming into us. The longest sentence ever for somebody who is considered a January 6th rioter, an ex-NYPD cop getting 10 years behind bars. His name is Thomas Webster. I want you to look at the screen, however you're streaming this. Do you see the red circle there? Okay, so that's him. He's appearing to assault a federal officer with some kind of a weapon here. This ex-NYPD officer says in court he should have recognized as a former cop that police were overwhelmed. He says he can never look at his kids again. The judge, tough, man, saying his testimony was not credible. 10 years is what he got. Now, that's a lot, right? That's the most we've ever seen for a January 6th defendant, but it is still short of the 17 and a half years that the government wanted. There's that. We're going to talk more about that in a second. There's also Julian Cater, who's pleading guilty to 2 counts of assaulting law enforcement with bear spray. One of the officers he assaulted was the late Brian Sicknick, who died after the attack. But a medical examiner says the events of January 6th played a role in his death, which was of natural causes. And as that case wraps up, a new one is popping up down in Texas. Kelly Sorrell, the lawyer for the far-right Oath Keepers group, she's been arrested. She's facing federal charges for her role. Let me bring in Ryan Reilly for us now. And let me take this in a couple of buckets, and let me start with Thomas Webster, this ex-New York police officer. Because literally as we were talking to Vaughn, I'm looking at my phone, and his lawyer is talking to members of the media outside the courtroom. Walk us through some of that and some of the other kind of damning things that were said in court today.
Yeah, so Thomas Webster effectively, I think, got this longest sentence in part because he clearly lied during his trial. He sort of crafted this narrative around the video and sort of created a story. He actually claimed that when you see that in that photo of him grabbing the police officer's mask, he claimed he did that because, he was just trying to show the officer his hands. And the jury clearly wasn't buying that. The judge didn't buy it. The prosecution didn't buy it. And that was, I think, an aggravating factor for the judge when it ultimately came time for sentencing, because the judge wasn't very happy with the testimony that he tried to put forth. Obviously, there's something sort of referred to as a trial penalty. You end up with a longer sentence if you go to trial, if you take your case before a jury, because that takes a lot of DOJ resources. And there's some complaints from defense attorneys about how harsh that penalty can be. But I think it's pretty clear here that this is a pretty strong message in a lot of these cases that it's not a good idea if there's overwhelming evidence against you to go to trial, A, and it's not a good idea to, B, lie on the stand during a trial if that's the path you choose to take, Haley.
Former President Trump was out on the radio today suggesting that if he becomes president again, he's obviously speculated he's going to run, he's suggesting he may pardon some of the people who were convicted related to January 6th crimes. That would potentially include Thomas Webster here. Did Webster talk at all about Mr. Trump's culpability, the way that he viewed Mr. Trump's role in the attack, or did his lawyer get into that?
His lawyer did, referring to him as, falling for these lies. And actually, the prosecutor was pretty explicit here. Typically, in these cases, you'll hear prosecutors refer to maybe the former president or politicians is generally what they say when they're talking about these election lies. But they were very specific in this case. The federal prosecutor, the assistant U.S. attorney, was saying Trump's lies, regardless of whether or not Thomas Webster believed them, that wasn't to blame for everything that he did here. Because even if he fell for those lies, as he appeared to have done, he should have known you can't assault law enforcement officers. He should have known as a former cop just what a brutal attack that was and how tough things were for officers that day. It was a really tough situation that officers were facing on January 6th, and the prosecution argued to the judge, and the judge agreed that this was an instance where someone who obviously should have known better and shouldn't have engaged in that type of activity.
Let me just ask you before we go here, because I think the big headline, right, is that this is the longest sentence yet we have seen for one of these defendants. But it may not last that long because somebody else that we just talked about, the person who is accused of assaulting Brian Sicknick, could face up to 20 years, right?
That's right. But I think that actually, because he actually took a plea deal, it could end up being slightly under that. The guidelines could be slightly smaller than 10 years, actually.
Ryan Reilly covering all of this for us tonight. Ryan, thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.